Hi there! Welcome to Pallet University and part 4 of our PaleoPokes series where we take a look at fossil Pokemon from a real paleontologist perspective. Today we're going to be talking about both Dracozolt and Arctovish, because between parts 2 and 3, I've already talked about all 4 of the fossil pieces introduced in Generation 8, so if you haven't seen those videos, make sure to check those out. The link to the playlist will be down in the description, as well as up here in the cards. Also, if you're one of the roughly 42% of my viewers who are not subscribed, make sure to hit that button down below as well. I'd really like to get to 175 subscribers by the end of March, and with your help, we can definitely get there. Right, so let's start with Dracozolt. I feel like Dracozolt is the most sort of complete or like realistic looking of the 4 fossils. I would say that Arctovish arguably looks more realistic, or I guess it would if its head were on straight, but we'll get to that later in the video. I feel like if the bird front half were actually to scale with the back half, I feel like it would look much better. And that's for a good reason. Like I mentioned, I've already talked about both of Dracozolt's halves between parts 2 and 3 of this series, but just in case you haven't seen those, I'll recap it for you. The fossilized drake, which makes up Dracozolt's bottom half, is likely based off of some kind of theropod dinosaur, most likely some kind of tyrannosaur just based on its bulk, its number of toes, and the fact that it also shares the dragon typing, which is similar to Tyrantrum, which is very clearly based off of a Tyrannosaurus rex. The fossilized bird is also based off of a non-avian theropod dinosaur. And I make that distinction because birds are dinosaurs. So when you say a dinosaur, that's not being descriptive enough. So if you want to say a dinosaur proper, like Tyrannosaurus rex, you should really phrase it as non-avian theropod dinosaur. It's kind of a mouthful, but it is technically much more accurate. TLDR, the fossilized bird's not actually based off of a bird. It's much more similar to a troodontid-like dinosaur. The kinds of dinosaurs that are most closely related to birds, but are not yet birds. And that's mostly based off of just the fact that it still has 3 fingers on its hands. It has the only feathers that are really noticeable are the ones on its head, which are not really useful for flight. And also it still has teeth in its mouth. This is why Dracozolt is the most believable as a real Pokemon and not the abomination of science that it is. Because its 2 halves are much more closely related to one another than, say, just slapping a fish head on the end of a Tyrannosaurus rex tail. As I mentioned, Arctovish would probably look the best if its head was on right. Can you imagine trying to do anything if your head was just backwards? If the head was on correctly, Arctovish would be a relatively normal looking Pokemon, but they had to go and ruin it. The front half of Arctovish is from the fossilized fish fossil, and it's based off of the skull and pectoral fins of this fish from about 380-ish million years ago called Dunkleosteus. This was a really big fish, like a 30-foot fish. It was one of the first real, like, apex predators to ever exist on Earth. The back half is actually quite interesting, though. This half comes from the fossilized dino, which really bothers me. All it does is add to the confusion about what is and is not a dinosaur. This is not a dinosaur. This is not a dinosaur. This is also not a dinosaur. If it lived in the water, or it flew around besides birds, it is not a dinosaur. Okay, let's talk about the actual fossil. I said in part 3 of this series, where I talked about Arctozolt, that I thought this fossil was based off of a mosasaur, because of the keel on the tail. So mosasaurs use their tail for propulsion and needed that keel to give them extra surface area to move through the water, whereas plesiosaurs and pliosaurs, which were sort of the ones that use flippers instead, they use their flippers. They basically use them to fly through the water. The aerodynamics and hydrodynamics are roughly the same, but they use like a flying motion to fly through the water instead of using their tail. However, I learned after that episode that in Japanese, this fossil is actually called the fossilized plesiosaur. So I'm not really sure what to make of it, because just based on proportions, it doesn't look like a plesiosaur. The back legs look way too flimsy, because they were just as important as the front legs for moving through the water. So I think that it might be something like a mistranslation, because I don't think English games would let them put enough characters in for fossilized plesiosaur. That's a lot of letters, so I feel like they had to change it to fossilized dino just to shorten the number of characters in the item's name. I still really think it's a mosasaur though. So with that, that wraps up our sort of video coverage of the 4 new fossil Pokemon. Which one is your favorite? Which one of these monstrosity abominations is your favorite? Personally, for me, I think it's Dracozolt. Its design is just like objectively the worst, but like there's just something charming almost about it. Plus, like I do play a reasonable amount of competitive, and it's just by far the best. Anyway, let me know your favorite down below in the comments, as well as on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter at Pallet_U to keep up on all things Pokemon science, as well as we do also have a Patreon, the link to which will be down in the description. And as always, there's a time and place for everything.